Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. My guest on this episode of Writers at Work is Rachael New, creator, showrunner, and primary writer of Miss Scarlet, the Victorian-era crime drama now in its 5th season. It's streaming here and there and will launch on PBS Masterpiece on January 12th. In its 4 previous seasons, the series was known as Miss Scarlet and the Duke. Miss Scarlet fans know that the Duke is gone. Scotland Yard Inspector Detective William Wellington has left London for a position with the New York City Police Department, placing him far from the private investigator Eliza Scarlet. What will become of their contentious relationship that has blossomed into a romance? And how will Miss Scarlet, who is a more than competent PI, adjust to a new inspector detective who, unlike his blunt force predecessor, is cool and deliberate and declares absolute disinterest in working with private investigators? Those are questions for Rachael New, who launched the series back in 2020. Prior to that, she wrote for many TV series in the UK, beginning with Monday Monday, a comedy set in the headquarters of a supermarket chain, and Trolleyed, also set in a supermarket. She has a long list of credentials, now topped by Miss Scarlet, which works beautifully as a crime series and a glimpse into a vividly depicted Victorian society. Rachael New, welcome to Writers at Work.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you take us back to the conception of Miss Scarlet and the Duke? What was your elevator pitch?
It's very, very clear in my mind where it came from. So I just finished working on a show called New Tricks. It was a UK show. You might have heard of it. I suspect it's been over in the States as well, repeated. And I had just come off a trail of shows that were more or less all crime shows. So I knew that that's the kind of genre I really enjoyed writing. And I was a period drama junkie as well. So Miss Scarlet sort of came from a place of putting all the things that I enjoyed. I love the Victorian era. So it was like crime, period drama. I'm a comedy writer. My background is in comedy. So I knew that it would have some kind of wit to it. And I was sitting in my back garden, gosh, probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more. And I just started to write my kind of outline for Miss Scarlet. I had the title straight away. And I wrote it really as more so really as a spec script, which was very freeing because I didn't have to worry about budgets or, I wasn't worried about, would anybody want this? Would anybody, because lots of producers kind of say period drama is very expensive. I just wanted it was like an itch I had to scratch, and I just knew that there was a story and I just wanted to get it down on the page. With a view to maybe joining an existing show, perhaps a period show. So it kind of came from there. And I walked into my house, and my writing partner, who's also my husband, I kind of gave him the elevator pitch, which is, what do you think about London's first female detective? And he just went, yeah, I think that's a really brilliant idea. And he is a really tough audience. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So it was just a real passion project for me. And yeah, I loved every minute of it. Loved it.
Did you have a background in historical fiction? Do you call it that in TV writing, historical fiction, or?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say. I love, that's the kind of those are the kind of films that I always love to watch. I loved Austen and Dickens, and even as a kid, it was those sort of big Hollywood, Spartacus and the big Hollywood Sunday afternoon films or Bank Holiday Monday films. I would just be engrossed in, and so that's what I love to watch. And then I do love historical fiction in terms of reading it as well. So it was really my wheelhouse, as it were.
You walk that fine line really well, I think. I mean, I think you can detect a little bit of passion for Jane Austen, and of
Yeah.
course, any period piece set in London is going to bring Dickens to mind, but it never feels second generation. It never feels borrowed. You've somehow created something that is familiar and yet feels so original.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I always hope for, Miss Scarlet, and it's my aim, is to write something where you do feel you're in you're in a period drama, you're in the 19th century, but to have that sort of, it resonates with today. Sometimes it's the themes, sometimes it can be a bit of, the behavior or the humor, or, just something that my aim really was that people, the audience, would enjoy it, who might not necessarily always be, period drama fans. And it just seems that that's what's happened. We've had such a lovely response, both here in the UK and through Masterpiece, PBS Masterpiece, and it feels like, that our fans really do feel that it resonates with many sort of themes today.
Yeah, I want to go back to that point, and not to be too fanboyish about it, but you have this uh, premise, a young woman struggling to establish herself in a difficult profession, and you have the period that people seem to love. Um, that can be a tired combination too. It doesn't necessarily translate to new and exciting. And that's what you've done with this program. You've taken something that feels familiar and yet has a spark of freshness and newness to it.
That's really lovely. Yeah, I mean, that's
By the way, I don't know how you're supposed to respond to that.
I am responding by smiling, thinking, oh, that's such a nice thing to say. Yeah, and that's really, really what the aim was, and still is. It's just to have that freshness to it, and to keep the sort of the energy of each week the stories rocking along, but peppering it with humor, some romance, a bit of will they, won't they, and just having created this sort of world of characters, which often they are quite Dickensian, and Austen actually, but it's about Eliza is the center of our world, and it's about the characters that, friends and foe, that orbit her world. She has a completely different dynamic and different relationship with each and every one of the characters, be it kind of Clarence or Mr. Potts or Ivy. So that's what I hope keeps it fresh, because sometimes you can work on shows where you sort of look at your script and you think, well, this bit of dialogue could be said by any character. And I always try, and my partner, Ben Edwards, has this too, which is we try and make it very distinctive, each voice as distinctive as possible. And I think that's hopefully what keeps the fun and the energy up in each season.
Now, as a writer, you've given each of the characters a rich backstory, and Eliza has a particularly rich backstory. Her father was a private investigator. He dies suddenly, leaving her in financial straits. Her father helped raise the Duke, sort of like Don Corleone and Tom Hagen, only on
Yes.
the right side of the law.
Yeah.
But it's not a sister and stepbrother type thing at all. There's a history and mutual regard, but always the possibility of substantial relationship. Was that backstory always there for you, or did you build it as you were going along?
It was always there from the beginning. I always knew that Duke and Eliza, I wanted them to have this very complicated relationship where, as adults, they are attracted to each other, but they're also in some ways family. They're the only family. I mean, Eliza has got Ivy, but they rely on each other as confidants, friends. But equally, they were stepping on each other's toes. So it just to, I mean, I'm sure all writers know this, that the more complicated you and more obstacles you throw in your character's way, the more interesting it is. So it was always about, and also when you're writing a will they won't they, you do have to think about, well, what are the obstacles? What are the things that you can throw in their way that is going to cause them some issues? Because otherwise it's going to be, plain sailing, and that's quite boring. So having Duke and Eliza, giving them this history, and as you say, Duke sort of looked at Henry Scarlet as a father figure, and it just made things nice and juicy and complex between them, which is why they never quite sorted it out, their relationship.
Yeah. I'd like to go back a bit, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
because I think it echoes into the new season, which, by the way, I've had the pleasure of seeing already. Um, I want to talk about the character of Arabella.
Mm.
Um, it was season 3, was it not, that you introduced her?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. This was a fascinating choice. We know that Miss Scarlet has feelings for the Duke, but she's committed to her job and burnishing her credentials. And in swoops Arabella, who was cruel to Miss Scarlet as a child. And now she appears to be a successful restaurateur. Um, can you tell me how you fleshed out Arabella? It feels like it might have been a lot of fun for you as a writer to do that.
Oh, definitely. And one of the big things about Arabella was, um, with Eliza, I think it's really important. I think why people like her so much or relate to her is that she's quite flawed. And that's so important, to make her an interesting person with lots of layers. And what I wanted with Arabella was to say, all right, this woman wasn't very nice to Eliza at school. We all had, people like that at school. But equally, perhaps it's time to forgive her as an adult, because Arabella was always going to be quite a fun person, perhaps somebody that you'd want to sit next to at a dinner party, and so I didn't want to make her, completely evil, or, the goody or the baddie. It was more about life is really complicated and there are lots of grey areas. And perhaps Eliza is at fault as well, because she's come in with all this prejudice about her. She obviously has, the threat that, there's an attraction between Arabella and Duke. And so it was also, in creating Arabella, it was trying to find a really interesting foil to Eliza, but to also not paint Arabella as a baddie, to say, well, maybe Eliza's being a bit judgmental, or, maybe Eliza is not being fair on her, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So again, it was just about what's the most interesting relationship to kind of plop into Eliza's life, and to also make her view her relationship with Duke with a little more clarity as well. Because there is an element of, well, it's a bit late now. The period of time you're talking about, when Arabella sort of rocks up, they get together, and no matter what Eliza wanted to tell Duke from that point onwards, it was like, well, he's now with this other woman, rightly or wrongly. So it's just, again, it's about trying to create something akin to real life, because, as I say, life is complicated. It's not black and white. It's very grey and murky and messy. And I think Arabella brought that to Eliza's life.
yeah. I do want to move forward, but I think what you pulled off with Arabella is something very clever and essential for writers to understand. And you use the word clarity. That is really a good description of what you did. I had sympathy for Miss Scarlet up to that point,
Mm,
but I wasn't really sure that I liked her.
mm,
And then Arabella moves in, and I recall so clearly the moment Miss Scarlet saw the Duke kiss Arabella,
mm,
which was not a chaste kiss at all, and the expression on her face. That moment was so wonderfully wrought. And
mm,
that's a tool at your disposal that we novelists lack, the ability to convey so much with a single glance.
mm.
And to me, it just rocketed the series in a whole new place. which
Yeah, it was a really moving moment to film, and the Kate Phillips, who obviously plays Eliza, she does have that rawness to her where you really get you get to peer inside her soul. She's such a good actor. So, I think that obviously massively helped. You can see how broken she is from it.
yeah,
Uh,
no, it was one of those surprising but inevitable moments, and you concealed it quite well. I really admired that bit of writing there. Onto another subject, I guess. Did you anticipate how the viewers would react to Inspector Wellington? Did you know that we would like him so much?
I kind of did. I mean, with Duke, it was really interesting. So we were really lucky to have Stuart Martin join the show. I think there was a real chemistry between him and Kate. Duke, I think, is a kind of man of the people. He's kind of come from nothing. He was relatable. He had a really good, witty sense of humor. But what was really important again about him was that he was flawed. And it was, this is the 19th century. And so it was important to sort of say, all right, well, it might not be a very popular way to think, but, he would want to get married and have his wife at home and have, she's in the sort of cooking and cleaning or whatever, having children. He's a traditional man. And Eliza obviously pushed those boundaries or that sort of outlook, made him often rethink what he wanted. But he was a conventional man. And some viewers picked that up and were like, well, he should be much more sort of progressive and open-minded. And then lots of other people were like, yeah, it's 1882. This is the authenticity of the time. So it was always a little bit of a gamble that, people would see him as this kind of gruff, macho man. But I think, again, Stuart brought something really lovely to the role. Like one of my favorite episodes was the episode where he was had a job offer in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and it was like, well, is he going to go? Is he going to stay? And you saw how important Scotland Yard was to him, how his office was once Henry Scarlet's office, and there was a real vulnerability to him. Again, we saw inside, what was going on inside of him, and I think that's why the fans loved it so much, because Stuart brought that to the role.
Did you have to restructure any of the storytelling in order to accommodate the fans' desire to spend more time with him or know him a little bit better?
No, I don't think I don't think we've ever really done that. I mean, we obviously know who the fans love, the characters they love the most. But to be honest, it's sort of quite an equal split. And we do really, really try and be as true to the creative as possible. So, at the beginning of each season, Ben and I will sit down and say, okay, what are we doing this season? And it's always Eliza is our starting point. It's like, what's her arc? What's going to happen for her this season? What does she want? What are her obstacles? And that leads it, really. And sometimes, unfortunately, even sometimes our most favorite characters, say like Mrs. Parker or Patrick Nash, or I love those characters. They're two of my favorite characters. But if the creative didn't find, wind and weave its way to bring in story for them, sometimes they weren't in the show. So Eliza is always very much our central point, our in to the show. And we're kind of just led by that, really. Obviously, Duke was such a huge part of her life, and he was in the title.
Yes, yes.
um, but it's always really been her, she's she's our protagonist.
No, I have to say that I don't really miss him that much.
Good.
And it's because you handled his exit so well.
Mm,
Um, you've got this universe of characters of, you have Nash and you have the Fitzroys and Fidgety Clarence and Phelps and they, because you've given them backstories, they do much more than take up space.
mm,
They're fully realized characters, and I don't think we, the viewer, really can indulge ourselves by saying, "I really miss the Duke," because there's
mm.
so much happening with these other characters.
Yeah, that I mean, thank you for saying that because I really feel the same. It's just because when you're writing them, that these characters are our babies, and you sort of put them out there hoping that people will take to them. Thankfully, I don't think we've ever had a problem landing character. I think Nash was our most controversial one, which was, lots of people loved to hate him. I think a lot of the fans saw him as a threat to Duke, but we sort of curveballed that, which was that their relationship was only ever going to be a platonic relationship because Nash has never had a platonic relationship with anyone. I doubt he'd ever had a true friend, and Eliza becomes his true friend, and he becomes hers. And again, that's a really interesting dynamic. So we just felt that each character, each of the main cast, they have to have some authenticity to them. They have to have their flaws. They have to have their idiosyncratic little moments. And I think if you can get that right, they become hugely entertaining, and especially when you get such a great cast that we're very lucky to have, and they breathe life into these characters. Because once the actor takes over the role, that's who you're obviously imagining. In subsequent episodes, if I was writing Phelps, I'd always think of Tim Chipping and how he delivered lines, and so you start getting led by the actor as well. So I think a lot of it is just being so passionate about the show and passionate about the characters, but also really being very careful of how they have been cast, and then ultimately being so lucky that the audience have loved them and welcomed them.
When did you start developing the character of Inspector Blake? What did you need from him? Not the actor Tom Durant Pritchard, but from the new inspector.
I would say when we knew that Stuart was leaving, so that would have been around late season 4, we started to chew on, okay, well, what do we want for Eliza? What's what's going to make her life interesting? We obviously didn't just want a Duke replacement, but we did put quite a lot of thought into it, and we did love the idea of a slightly more progressive man. We always knew that it would be a new detective inspector because we wanted to keep that connection in her life with Scotland Yard, because that's so important to the show. It's always about, she can't knock on any door and walk into any room, say, like a detective inspector could. So we were very definite that there would be a new detective inspector, but we wanted somebody. We liked the idea of an ex-army, someone who was a bit more structured, perhaps a bit more uptight, somebody who couldn't care less whether she was a woman or not. He just didn't like private detectives because they weren't reliable. And it just brought a whole new dynamic, because Eliza would have to really take a step back and think, okay, I now need to rethink. I need to rethink how to manage this man and how to navigate this very different character. With Duke and Eliza, it was always, Eliza was generally the smartest one in the room, but now she's got somebody who is every bit as smart as her. But equally, Blake looks at her and he is impressed with her, and he is intrigued by her. But, he's got a daughter, he's a single parent, he lost his wife, there's stakes in the game. So again, it's about what obstacles can we give Blake? Because we knew that we wanted to, hopefully this isn't a plot spoiler, but everybody loves a will they won't they, but we wanted to do something slightly different this time.
Yeah.
It's a will they won't they, but it's a different trajectory.
You mentioned the daughter. Again, as a writer, you set up that scene so beautifully when she and Eliza meet for the first time.
Mm.
It comes off so casually, but it's a thunderous moment,
Mm.
and you just let it ripple. And
Yeah.
I may be wrong, but I think then you sort of go away from it. You let that after effect play out.
Yes, and it's what's really lovely about why we did that. It's what we really love to do is to the idea of Eliza digesting. She sort of realizes that this, even though she's this workaholic and she's working round the clock, and she sort of comes into the orbit of this man who has got a private life, he's got a home life, something that she didn't really even consider. And again, Blake's presence in her life is one of the things that starts to make her think about her own life and about what balance she's got, and have think about those big questions. So they both they bring each other, they bring something to the other one to make them digest and marinate on life.
I don't think the series would work as well as it does if the crimes weren't intriguing and that they weren't addressed in a systematic and logical way. We spend a lot of time talking about Miss Scarlet's issues and romance and but not enough about the crimes and how they're solved. What are your influences as a screenwriter in crime fiction?
Well, it's interesting with the crimes because you're right. If you go on, say, any social media, it's very rare that anybody actually talks about the crime of the week, which I'm always really fascinated by because that's by far the hardest bit. Coming up with stories of the week each week is it's tricky because you sort of start to feel like that season five's just gone out, and you're like, gosh, what other worlds is there left to play out? And then you always come up with something. But yeah, the crimes, people are much more intrigued by the characters, which I suppose is actually really lovely because that's my passion. With Miss Scarlet, it's the crimes are always about, again, how is this going to affect Eliza? What does this not so much teach her, but what does this throw in her path? And in terms of the influence, I loved Sherlock Holmes. I mean, for me, it didn't really get much better than that. And I suppose I just loved watching crime shows, and I'd written on lots of crime shows over the years. So I think it was a combination of that. I like the winding and the weaving of the mystery beats, and yeah, it's just so much fun.
I don't want to give too much away, and a lot of our subscribers are crime fiction writers. But I want to point to the first three episodes of the new season because there is a crime and it is solved, but it's handled so beautifully, and you conceal and then dispatch information so artfully and allow us to participate in the solution.
Hmm.
And so I recommend the show highly as really excellent crime fiction writing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, and enough. I'm such a
No, that's
fanboy
great.
here. Listen, can we talk about your history a bit? Um,
Mhm.
I think some of the shows that you're most associated with didn't have much of a following here in the
Mm,
States.
mm,
But so for us here with Miss Scarlet and the Duke, you were a new voice as a showrunner and head writer.
mm.
How did you? So you made that leap really from staff writer to the big boss. How did you do that?
I was very lucky because my spec script went off to a company called Element 8. So that was an American production company, and had three partners to it. And they loved it, and it was always very clear to them, and they're my partners now. So it's Patty Ishimoto, Jean Ishimoto, and Harvey Myman. And we then later on had Patrick Irwin, who is a UK producer, join us. So we were a very, very tight team. And it was always just assumed from the very, very beginning, this was going to be structured as a more of an American show. So it was that sort of the true showrunner role, which we don't really have in the UK. I think it's getting more like that, but it's quite different, really. And I just embraced it because I think there was no one more passionate about the show than me. And I found that I absolutely loved it. I've ended up directing 3 episodes so far over the years, which I wasn't again expecting to do. I'm not sure I would do it on another show, but I love doing it on this show. And it was almost like they handed me a train set and I was allowed to play with it. And I just have been, loving it ever since. I mean, it's really hard work. I'm out in Belgrade at the moment, and which is where we film the show. And, it's very long days, and it's a lot of work, and it's often 7 days a week. Like I finish the shoot, then I go straight into post-production. And then we often are writing the new season whilst I'm also still in post-production. So it's utterly full on. Sometimes I don't really see it as a job. It's just a way of life. So it's just joyous, really. So I just felt very passionate about the project, and to have such a fantastic team around me that have been so supportive. Yeah, it was a dream come true that I'm going to say the word allowed, just because we don't really have this role in the UK. So I was sort of allowed to step up and get involved in everything, and that's what's happened.
Yeah. Are you hinting that there will be a season 6?
As soon as I said I was in Belgrade, I thought, all I'm going to say is watch this space. Is that okay
Okay,
with Jim?
very, very clever, very clever. Now that you're fully occupied, this question might be silly, but you've had this kind of success. People recognize the quality of your work and the dedication. What are your ambitions?
It's a funny one. In all honesty, my ambition is to keep working with really decent people. And when I say decent, I don't just mean, talent people, because out in Belgrade, I've got the most amazing, talented team. I really have, from our director to our cinematographer, our set design, costume. So I am surrounded by extraordinary, clever people, but they're just really nice people. They're fun, they're collaborative. And I think it doesn't matter what dream you could have your absolute dream show that you've come up with, but if you're not surrounded by a nice kind of jolly team, and I know this is going to sound a bit sugary, but it's basically a family, because you spend so much time with these people in production that I think it would all be for nothing. I've got various friends in the industry, and I've worked on shows before where it's been a bit of a miserable experience, and it often doesn't need to be. So my ambition, beyond Scarlet, I mean, my ambition is to keep making Scarlet, but my ambition beyond Scarlet is again to create something that's really, really nice to when you get out of bed and you're really looking forward to going to work. Because as I say, I spend so much time at work. The notion of dreading it or not enjoying it, we just don't do egos here. If anyone has an ego, they don't last very long. So it's working with really nice, talented people, and that's ongoing. What I would love to carry on doing.
I've been speaking with Rachael New, the quite talented creator, showrunner, and writer of the rich and wonderful series Miss Scarlet and the Duke, and Miss Scarlet minus the Duke. Rachael, thanks so much for joining us on Writers at Work.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking me on, Jim.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.